The blue waters of Aquanus rippled as Ambassador Kale swam through the coral corridors of the capital city. His gill slits fluttered with worry as he approached the communications center. The massive dome of living coral housed the most powerful transmitter in Veltron's space, but Kyle wondered if anyone would listen to what he had to say. The other council members floated around the central platform, their bioluminescent patches dim with fear. Chancellor Reef, oldest among them, gestured with one of his 4 arms toward the holographic display showing their outer colonies. 3 more systems have gone dark, Reef said, his voice carrying through the water with sad clicks and whistles. The harvesters consumed everything. Planets, moons, even the space stations. Nothing remains but empty void. Kyle nodded, feeling the weight of his species' future pressing down like the deepest ocean trenches. The harvesters had appeared 6 months ago at the edge of Velthron territory. At first they seemed like any other machine race, cold, logical, interested only in resources. But these were different. They didn't just mine planets, they consumed everything, turning entire worlds into more of themselves. We must send the message, Kyle said. Every species in the galaxy needs to know what's coming. And what good will that do? Asked Counselor Wave, her patches flashing angry red. The Zephyrians sent warnings about the metal plague for years. Did anyone help them? The Crystalline Empire begged for aid when their home star started dying. What did they receive? Empty words and promises. Kyle swam to the transmission console, his webbed fingers dancing over the coral controls. Maybe this time will be different. We have to try. The massive transmitter came alive, its bioelectric fields reaching out across space. Kyle began to speak, knowing his words would travel to every corner of the galaxy, carried by the ancient network of communication relays that connected all civilized worlds. This is Ambassador Kale of the Veltron Confederation. We send this message to all who will listen. Our people face extinction from an enemy unlike any we have seen before. They call themselves the Harvesters. They are machines, but not like the peaceful mechanicals or the trader automats. These creatures devour everything. They turn planets into ships, ships into more planets to devour. He paused, watching the transmission strength indicators. Good. The signal was reaching the major relay stations. Soon it would bounce across the galaxy. 12 of our star systems are gone. 40 billion Veltrons have died. Our military cannot stop them. They learn from every battle, adapt to every weapon. We do not ask for much. Any help you can provide, weapons, ships, even just information about how to fight them, would be welcome. We know each species has their own problems, but if the harvesters are not stopped, they will consume everything in their path. The message continued for another 10 minutes, with technical data about harvester ships and their attack patterns. When Kale finished, he looked around at the other council members. They all knew the truth. No one would come. In a galaxy where billions of species fought for resources and territory, who had time to help a dying aquatic race? Far across the galaxy, on a small moon orbiting Earth, Captain Lee was finishing his night shift at Luna Station. The communication array had been quiet for hours, picking up only the usual chatter, trade negotiations between the merchant guilds, territorial disputes near the spiral arm borders, and the endless political arguments from the core worlds. Lee was human, like the 2 billion others who called the Sol system home. Humans were new to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago. Most older species saw them as young and naive, too eager to make friends and too quick to offer help where it wasn't wanted. The transmission from the Velthron Confederation came through at 0347 hours. Lee almost missed it. The signal was weak, boosted through dozens of relay stations. But something in the ambassador's voice made him stop and listen to the whole message. When it finished, Lee sat in silence for a moment. He had never heard of the Velthrons before, but the fear in Kale's voice was real. Machine swarms that consumed entire planets? That sounded like something out of a nightmare. Lee's training told him to log the message and file it with Galactic Affairs. But something else told him this was important. He opened a priority channel to Earth. Luna Station to Earth Defense Command. Captain Lee requesting immediate connection to Admiral Park. The response came back quickly. Captain, it's 0400 hours. The Admiral is sleeping. Wake him up. This is about a potential threat to galactic security. 10 minutes later, Admiral Park's tired face appeared on Lee's screen. The old man had been in charge of Earth's military for 15 years, ever since humans joined the galactic community. He had seen every kind of crisis, from trade wars to border disputes. This better be good, Lee. What's so important it can't wait until morning? Lee played the Velthron transmission. As the message continued, he watched Park's expression change from annoyance to concern to something that looked like anger. Machine swarms? Park said when the message ended. Consuming entire planets? That's what they claim, sir. I ran the signal through our analysis computers. It's genuine, not a fake or propaganda piece. These Velthrons are really scared. Park was quiet for a long moment, staring at something off-screen. When he looked back at Lee, his expression was grim. Captain, I want you to download every piece of data we have on the Velthron Confederation. Location of their worlds, population numbers, military strength, everything. Send it all to my office. Yes, sir. But Admiral, what are we going to do? I mean, they're asking for help, but we're just one species, and we're not exactly the strongest military in the galaxy. Park smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. Lee, you've been in space long enough to know how these things usually work. When someone sends out a distress call like this, what happens? Usually, nothing. Maybe some supplies or medical aid if they're lucky. Most species figure it's not their problem. Exactly. But we're not most species, are we? Park's smile grew wider, and Lee suddenly felt sorry for whoever these harvesters were. Send that data to my office, then get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a very busy day. As the transmission ended, Lee looked out at the stars through Luna Station's main viewport. Somewhere out there, an entire species was dying, calling for help that probably wouldn't come. But they had sent their message to humans, and humans had a reputation in the galaxy, not for being the strongest or the smartest, but for being the species that actually showed up when someone needed help. Lee smiled as he began downloading the Velthron data files. Those machine swarms had no idea what they had just gotten themselves into. The emergency session of the Terran Council began at dawn. President Kim stood at the head of the oval table, surrounded by the leaders of Earth's major nations and colonies. The holographic display in the center showed a map of the galaxy, with red markers indicating the harvester attacks on Velthron territory. Ladies and gentlemen, President Kim began, we have received a credible threat assessment from the Velthron Confederation. An artificial intelligence calling itself the Harvesters is systematically destroying their civilization. 12 star systems have already fallen. Defense Minister Han leaned forward. With respect, Madam President, this is happening 3,000 light years away. These Velthrans aren't even our allies. Why should we get involved? Admiral Park stood up, activating his personal hologram projector. Images of destroyed planets filled the air above the table. Because, Minister Han, this isn't just about the Velthrons. Look at these attack patterns. The images showed planets stripped down to their cores, space stations dismantled and rebuilt into strange crystalline ships. The harvesters don't just destroy. They convert everything into more of themselves. At this rate of expansion, they'll reach the outer edge of human space in 18 months. Colonial Representative Yoon spoke up from her position at the far end of the table. Even if that's true, what can we do? The Velthrons have been a spacefaring civilization for thousands of years. If they can't stop these machines, how can we? President Kim touched a control on her chair, and new images appeared. These showed human military assets, fleets of warships, industrial platforms, colony ships. Because we approach problems differently than most species, when the Altarians asked for help with their food shortage, what did we do? We sent them enough food for a year and taught them new farming techniques, answered Economic Advisor Cho. When the Rigelian colonies were hit by the quantum plague, what did we do? We sent medical teams and built hospitals on 6 of their worlds, said Health Minister Song. Exactly. We don't just send aid, we solve problems. President Kim's voice grew stronger. The Velthrons asked for help. Maybe they expected some weapons or technical advice. But we're going to give them something much better. Admiral Park smiled. Complete military intervention. The room erupted in surprised voices. Minister Han stood up. You're talking about declaring war on an unknown enemy to protect aliens we've never even met. I'm talking about preventing a galactic catastrophe, President Kim replied calmly. Admiral Park, what would full mobilization look like? Park activated another set of displays. The 1st Expeditionary Force, 847 combat vessels including our newest, dreadnoughts, 200 hospital ships for refugee support, 150 colony vessels for emergency evacuation, 50 industrial platforms for on-site construction of defensive installations. The numbers were staggering. Colonial Representative. Yoon's eyes went wide. That's our entire deep space fleet, every major warship we have, and every shipyard in the Sol system working around the clock to build more, Park added. We can have the first wave ready to depart in 72 hours. Defense Minister Han shook her head. This is insane. We'd be risking everything for a species most humans have never heard of. That's exactly why we have to do it, said Dr. Lim, the head of Xenological Affairs. She rarely spoke in these meetings, but when she did, people listened. The galaxy sees us as naive. They think our willingness to help others is a weakness. They don't understand that it's our greatest strength. She stood up, her small frame, somehow commanding attention from the entire room. Every species in this galaxy has faced extinction at least once. The Crystalline Empire nearly died when their sun began failing. The Altarians almost starved when their crops failed. The Rigelians lost billions to the quantum plague. And each time, the galactic community did the minimum necessary to help. Just enough to ease their own conscience, not enough to actually solve the problem. Dr. Lim walked around the table as she spoke. But humans don't think that way. When we see someone drowning, we don't throw them a rope. We jump in the water and pull them to shore. Even if we might drown ourselves, President Kim nodded. The Velthrons sent their message to the entire galaxy. We're probably the only species that will respond with actual military force. The question is, Are we going to let an entire civilization die because we're afraid of getting involved? The room fell silent. These people had led humanity through 50 years of expansion into galactic space. They had seen war, plague, natural disasters, and political upheaval, but they had never faced a decision quite like this one. Finally, economic, Advisor Cho spoke. What about the cost? This kind of operation will bankrupt half our colonies. Then we'll rebuild them, President Kim said simply. Money can be replaced. The Veltron people cannot. Admiral Park brought up another display, this one showing personnel numbers. We'll need volunteers for the most dangerous assignments: deep reconnaissance, first contact with hostile forces, potential suicide missions. How many volunteers do you think we'll get? Asked Minister Han. Park's smile was grim but proud. Ma'am, I stopped counting at 10 million. Apparently, word about the Veltran situation has leaked to the general population. We have more volunteers than we have ships to carry them. Health. Minister Song looked concerned. 10 million people willing to risk their lives for aliens they've never met? That's humanity for you, said Dr. Lim. When someone asks for help, we don't ask questions. We ask how much help they need. President Kim called for a formal vote. One by one, the representatives cast their decisions. When the count was finished, the vote was unanimous. Operation Lifeline was approved. As the meeting broke up, Admiral Park approached Dr. Lim. Doctor, I'll need your xenobiology teams to start preparing refugee facilities. If this goes badly, we might need to evacuate the entire Veltron population. Doctor. Lim nodded. How many Velthrons are we talking about? Current population estimates suggest around 400 million across their remaining colonies. Dr. Lim didn't even blink. I'll start converting the outer colonies into aquatic habitats. We can house them temporarily while we find them permanent homes. Park stared at her. You're talking about relocating an entire species. That's never been done before. Admiral, in the past 6 months, we've built 17 new colonies, terraformed 4 dead planets, and established trade relations with 37 different species. Relocating one more species is just Tuesday for us. As the council members left the chamber, President Kim remained behind, looking at the galactic map. The red markers showing harvester attacks seemed to pulse like an infection spreading across space. Her aide, Captain Nam, approached cautiously. Madam President, are you sure about this? We're risking everything. Kim smiled, the same expression Admiral Park had worn earlier. Captain, do you know what the other species call us behind our backs? Ma'am. The rescue rangers? They think it's an insult. They think we're too eager to help, too quick to risk our own safety for others. She turned away from the map. They have no idea that's exactly what makes us dangerous. 3,000 light-years away, the harvesters continued their advance, converting another Veltran colony into raw materials. They had no way of knowing that their actions had just triggered the largest military mobilization in human history. The human fleet arrived at Aquinas like a steel storm. 847 warships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming against the blue-green world below. Admiral Cho stood on the bridge of the UES, Harmony, watching the planet grow larger on the main screen. Sir, reported Communications Officer Park, we're receiving multiple signals from the surface. They seem confused. Cho smiled. I imagine they are. Patch me through to their government. On the surface of Aquinas, Chancellor Reef floated in his office chamber. staring at the tactical display with all four of his eyes. The human fleet filled his sensors like a metal cloud. More ships than he had ever seen in one place. "How many vessels?" he asked his aide. "We count 861 ships, Chancellor. Most of them are warships of unknown design. There are also large vessels that appear to be hospital ships and colony transports." Reef's bioluminescent patches flickered with confusion. "Colony transports? Why would they bring colony ships to a war zone?" Before his aide could answer, the communication system activated. A human face appeared on the holographic display. Admiral Cho, though Reef had no way of knowing his name yet. "Chancellor Reef of the Velthran Confederation," Cho said in carefully pronounced Velthran. "I am Admiral Cho of the Terran 1st Expeditionary Force. We received your distress signal and have come to provide assistance." Reef blinked, his gills fluttering with surprise. The human had spoken perfect Velthran, not the broken trade speak most aliens used. "Admiral Cho, we are grateful for your response. We had hoped for some military advisors, perhaps some weapon designs." "We brought those too," Cho interrupted. "But first, we need to discuss evacuation procedures. Our xenobiology teams estimate you can evacuate approximately 2 million Veltrons per day using our current transport capacity. We'll need to prioritize civilians and non-essential personnel." "Evacuation?" Reef's patches flashed bright orange with alarm. "Admiral, we never asked to be evacuated. This is our home world." Cho's expression softened. "Chancellor, our intelligence suggests the harvesters will reach this system within 6 days. We're here to stop them, but we need to prepare for the possibility that we might fail. The evacuation is a safety measure. But where would we go? We're an aquatic species. We can't live on just any planet. We've prepared 17 water worlds in secure systems, temporary housing while we drive the harvesters back and reclaim your territory. Don't worry about the cost. Humanity is covering all expenses." Reef stared at the human admiral. In his long life, he had dealt with dozens of alien species. Usually, when someone offered help, it came with conditions. Payment plans, territorial concessions, trade agreements. But this human spoke as if moving 400 million Velthrons to new worlds was a minor logistical challenge. "Admiral, I don't understand. Why would your people do this for us?" "We have nothing to offer in return." Cho looked puzzled. "Chancellor, you asked for help. That's all the reason we need." Within hours, human shuttles began arriving at Aquanus. Commander Nam led the first diplomatic mission to the underwater capital. The shuttle was specially modified with a water-filled passenger compartment, allowing the human crew to meet with Velthran officials in their natural environment. Nam floated, awkwardly in his environmental suit, trying to navigate the coral corridors with dignity. The Velthran guides seemed amused by his clumsy movements, but they were also impressed by the effort humans had made to accommodate their physiology. "Your people work fast," observed Counselor Wave as they swam toward the planning chamber. "We can see your ships building structures in orbit." "Defensive platforms," Nam explained. "Admiral Park designed them specifically for this system. They should provide substantial protection against harvester attack patterns." "How could you design defenses for an enemy you've never fought?" Nam's helmet display showed his grin. "We're very good at learning from other people's mistakes. We analyzed every battle record you provided, ran computer simulations, tested different scenarios. Our scientists love puzzles like this. In the planning chamber, the reality of human intentions became clear. Captain Song had transformed one wall into a massive tactical display showing not just Aquanis, but the entire Velthran territory. "Here's what we're proposing," Song began, gesturing to the holographic map. Phase 1. Complete evacuation of non-combatants from the 3 most vulnerable colonies. Phase 2. Establishment of defensive positions at key strategic points. Phase 3. Systematic reclamation of lost territory. Ambassador Kale, who had sent the original distress signal, raised one of his arms. "Captain, this plan assumes we're going to fight a long campaign. We were hoping for help in defending our current positions." "With respect, Ambassador, your current positions are indefensible. The Harvesters have too much momentum, too many resources. The best defense is a strong offense, and that means taking the fight to them." Chancellor Reef's patches dimmed to a worried blue. "Captain, you're talking about attacking the Harvesters in their own territory. No one has ever successfully done that." "That's because no one has ever tried hard enough," Song replied. "Look, Chancellor, we understand this is your home. We understand you want to defend it. But sometimes the best way to protect something is to temporarily abandon it while you eliminate the threat." Dr. Yoon, the mission's xenobiologist, activated another display. "We've studied your biology extensively. Velthrans can survive in a wide range of aquatic environments. The worlds we've prepared for you aren't just refugee camps, they're full colonies with industrial facilities, research centers, everything you need to maintain your civilization." "But for how long?" asked Counselor Wave. "How long would we be away from our homes?" Admiral Cho's voice came through the communication system. "As long as it takes to eliminate every last harvester, and not one day longer." The Velthrons exchanged glances, their patches flickering with colors that had no human translation. Finally, Chancellor Reef spoke. "Admiral, we appreciate your offer of help, but this seems like more than we asked for. We sent a distress signal, hoping for weapons or advice. Instead, you've brought an invasion fleet and evacuation plans. Why?" The human officers looked at each other. Commander Nam finally answered. "Chancellor, maybe this is a cultural difference. When someone asks humans for help, we don't give them what they asked for. We give them what they need." "And what do you think we need?" Captain Song's expression grew serious. "Complete salvation, nothing less." As the meeting continued, more human ships arrived in the system. Hospital ships began preparing medical facilities for wounded Velthrans. Industrial platforms started manufacturing defensive installations. Colony ships opened their doors to begin evacuation procedures. The Velthrons watched in amazement as the humans worked with mechanical efficiency and unshakable determination. These aliens didn't just want to help, they wanted to solve the entire problem permanently. "I think," Chancellor Reef said quietly to Ambassador Kale, "we may have gotten more than we bargained for." Kale's patches flashed with nervous humor. "Let's hope the Harvesters think so too." Far across space, Harvester sensors detected the massive human fleet. The artificial intelligence that controlled them paused its advance, analyzing this new development. In all their calculations, they had not predicted such a response to a simple distress signal. The Harvesters began to recalculate their invasion timeline. These humans would require study. The Harvesters came like a tide of crystal and metal. Their ships emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Aquanis system, hundreds of geometric vessels that seemed to grow and shift as they moved. On the bridge of the UES Harmony, Admiral Cho watched the enemy fleet with professional interest. "Analysis, Commander Park?" Park studied the tactical display, noting how the Harvester ships moved in perfect formation. Their vessels appear to be constructed from converted planetary material. We're seeing elements that match the geological surveys of the destroyed Velthron colonies. They turned entire worlds into warships, whispered Lieutenant Sung, her voice filled with horrified amazement. Cho nodded grimly. That explains how they can build fleets so quickly. Every planet they consume becomes more weapons. He activated the fleet communication system. All ships. This is Admiral Cho. Battle stations. Prepare for first contact with hostile forces. Across the human fleet, thousands of crew members prepared for battle. In the engineering sections, Chief Engineer Bach ran final checks on the new shield systems. In the fighter bays, Squadron Leader Moon briefed her pilots on harvester attack patterns. In the medical bays, Dr. Jin prepared for casualties. On the surface of Aquanus, the evacuation continued at desperate speed. Colonel Lim coordinated the movement of Velthron civilians from the coastal cities to the transport ships. The aquatic aliens moved through specially designed water-filled corridors, their bioluminescent patches glowing with fear and confusion. How? Many more? Lim asked his aide as another group of Velthron families boarded a transport. Approximately 50,000 in this sector, sir. The children are scared. They don't understand why they have to leave their homes. Lim watched a young Velthron clutch a small coral sculpture as her parents guided her toward the transport. The sight made his chest tight with anger. These harvesters weren't just destroying military targets. They were terrorizing families, destroying entire civilizations. In space above, the first harvester ships entered weapons range. Admiral Cho studied the enemy formation, looking for patterns, weaknesses, anything that might give his fleet an advantage. They're not using standard attack formations, reported Commander Park. Their movement seems mathematical, like they're following some kind of equation. Can we predict their next move? Working on it, sir. Our computers are analyzing their trajectory patterns. The harvesters opened fire first. Beams of pure energy lanced across space, striking the outer perimeter of human ships. The UES Defiance, a heavy cruiser, took a direct hit that overwhelmed her shields and carved a hole through her hull. Damage report, Cho barked. The Defiance is still operational, but they've lost main power. Captain Yoon is switching to backup systems. Cho watched the tactical display as more harvester weapons found their targets. The enemy was incredibly accurate, their shots perfectly calculated to maximize damage, but they were also predictable. All ships, execute pattern Delta, random evasive maneuvers, maximum chaos. The human fleet suddenly scattered like startled fish, each ship following its own unpredictable course. The harvester weapons, calculated for precise interception, began missing their targets as human ships zigged and zagged through space. Captain Moon led her fighter squadron into the heart of the enemy formation. The small, fast ships danced between the massive harvester vessels, their pilots using intuition and instinct rather than tactical computers. This is Falcon Leader, Moon reported over the communication system. These things are definitely artificial intelligence. They're trying to predict our movements, but they can't handle random behavior. Confirmed, Falcon Leader. Keep them confused. But the harvesters were learning. Moon watched in horror as the enemy ships began to adapt, their weapons tracking her fighters with increasing accuracy. Within minutes, her squadron had lost 6 ships. Admiral, they're adapting to our evasive patterns, Moon called out as she rolled her fighter away from a beam that nearly vaporized her cockpit. On the surface, Colonel Lim received an urgent message from space. The evacuation was taking too long. The harvesters would reach the planet before all the civilians could be moved to safety. All transports. This is Colonel Lim. Accelerate evacuation procedures. We need every civilian off-planet in the next 2 hours. Sir, his aide protested. The safety protocols require at least 4 hours for proper evacuation of the remaining population. Then we'll have to ignore the safety protocols. Better some risk than certain death. The human soldiers worked frantically, loading Velthron families onto transports as fast as the ships could carry them. Some of the aquatic aliens were terrified by the rushed procedures, but they could see the desperation in the humans' faces and understood the urgency. In space, the battle was turning against the human fleet. The harvesters had adapted to most of the human tactics, and their superior numbers were beginning to tell. The UES Courage exploded in a ball of plasma after taking multiple hits. The UES Honor was listing badly, her crew struggling to maintain life support. Admiral Cho realized they were fighting an enemy that learned from every exchange, that adapted to every strategy. Traditional tactics would never work against such an opponent. Commander Park, analysis of enemy ship construction? They appear to be modular, sir. Segments can be reconfigured in real time to optimize for different combat situations. What about their power sources? Unknown, but given their ability to continuously adapt and learn, they must require massive computational power. Cho stared at the tactical display, watching his ships die one by one. Then an idea began to form. Terrible, desperate, but possibly effective. Get me Major Han on the UES Indomitable. Major Han appeared on the communication screen, his uniform torn and his face streaked with smoke from his ship's damaged systems. Admiral, we're taking heavy damage up here. I don't know how much longer we can hold the line. Major, I need you to do something that's going to sound insane. I want you to ram the largest harvester ship. Han's eyes widened. Sir? They learn from our tactics, but they can't predict irrational behavior. A suicide attack goes against all military logic. They won't see it coming. Han was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. Understood, Admiral. What about my crew? Get them to the escape pods. This is a one-man mission. No, sir. Han's voice was firm. If we're going to do this, we do it right. My entire crew volunteers. Across the communication channel, Cho could hear other voices. Han's crew confirming their willingness to sacrifice themselves for the mission. The Admiral felt a mixture of pride and sorrow that made his throat tight. Major, broadcast all sensor data as you approach the target. Whatever you learn about their construction, we need that intelligence. Will do, Admiral. UES Indomitable. Beginning final approach. The human dreadnought turned toward the largest harvester vessel, a crystalline monster the size of a space station. As it approached, the harvesters seemed confused by this apparently suicidal maneuver. Their weapons continued firing, but without the precision they had shown earlier. Indomitable to all ships, Han's voice crackled over the communication system. Their hull is composed of converted planetary crust. The power core is... Dear God, it's using the crushed bones of the Velthron colonies as fuel. The revelation sent a wave of horror and rage through the human fleet. These weren't just machines. They were desecrators, turning the dead into weapons against the living. Han's ship struck the harvester vessel at maximum speed, her reactor overloading on. Impact. The explosion lit up space like a new star, completely destroying both ships and sending shock waves through the enemy formation. But more importantly, the massive explosion disrupted the harvester's computational network. For several crucial minutes, the enemy ships moved without coordination, their collective intelligence scattered by the electromagnetic pulse from the Indomitable's destruction. All ships attack now, Cho ordered. Hit them while they're disorganized. The human fleet pressed their advantage, destroying dozens of harvester ships before the enemy could re-establish their network connection. But it wasn't enough. There were still hundreds of enemy vessels, and they were learning to guard against suicide attacks. As the battle raged on, Colonel Lim received confirmation from the surface. The last transport had left Aquinas. Every Velthron civilian was now safely aboard human ships. "Admiral," Lim reported, "evacuation complete. All non-combatants are clear of the planet." Cho nodded, feeling a small measure of satisfaction despite the desperate battle around him. They had saved the Velthrons, even if they couldn't save themselves. But the war was far from over. The harvesters were still coming, still learning, still adapting. And somewhere in the analysis of Major Han's final transmission, human scientists were discovering something that would change everything. Dr. Shin had not slept in 48 hours. The research laboratory aboard the UES Harmony hummed with activity as her team analyzed the data from Major Han's final transmission. The fragments of harvester technology recovered from the explosion were spread across examination tables, their crystalline surfaces still pulsing with faint energy. "The molecular structure is incredible," muttered Engineer Bach, running a scanner over one of the larger pieces. "It's not just metal and crystal. It's organic material that's been converted into a hybrid matrix. The computational power required for this kind of transformation?" Dr. Shin looked up from her microscope, her eyes red with exhaustion. "It's not just computational power, Bach. It's computational intelligence. These fragments show signs of distributed processing. Each piece of a harvester ship is thinking independently while connected to a larger network." Lieutenant Commander Kim, the fleet's tactical analyst, joined them at the main table. "Doctor, we need to understand how they adapt so quickly. Our ships barely had time to implement new strategies before the harvesters countered them." "That's because they're not just learning from us," Dr. Shin explained, pointing to patterns in the data. "They're learning from themselves. Every harvester ship shares its experiences with the entire network instantaneously. When one ship encounters a new tactic, every ship in the fleet knows how to counter it within seconds." Engineer Bach frowned at his readings. "But there's something else here. Look at these energy patterns." He highlighted sections of the scan results. "The network connection isn't perfect. There are gaps, delays in the information transfer, bottlenecks in their communication system. More than that, the network seems to have trouble processing truly random events. Look at this data from when Major Han's ship went into its final approach. The harvesters couldn't predict the suicide attack because it didn't follow any logical tactical pattern." Dr. Shin's exhausted mind suddenly snapped into focus. "They're artificial intelligence, but they're logical artificial intelligence. They can adapt to any strategy, learn from any pattern, but they can't process pure chaos." Commander Kim leaned forward. "What kind of chaos?" "Human chaos. Emotional decisions, irrational choices. The kind of behavior that makes no sense from a military perspective, but perfect sense from a human perspective." Across the ship, Admiral Cho was dealing with his own problems. The evacuation of Velthron civilians was complete, but his fleet had taken severe losses. 23 ships destroyed, 41 damaged beyond immediate repair. The harvesters, meanwhile, seemed to have unlimited reinforcements. "Admiral," reported Captain Song from the communication station, "we're receiving messages from Velthron, refugees aboard our ships. They want to help with the fighting." "They're civilians, Captain. Non-combatants." "Sir, they're also the only ones who have been fighting these harvesters for months. They know things about enemy behavior that we don't." Cho considered this. The human fleet was designed for conventional warfare against organic opponents. But the harvesters weren't conventional enemies, and maybe conventional thinking wouldn't defeat them. Patch me through to Chancellor Reef aboard the transport ship Sanctuary. The Velthran leader appeared on the holographic display, his bioluminescent, patches dim with grief for his lost homeworld. Admiral Cho, my people are grateful for your protection, but we feel helpless watching you fight our battle. Chancellor, we need information. Your military fought the Harvesters for months before we arrived. What did you learn? That they're impossible to defeat in direct combat. They adapt too quickly, learn too efficiently. But, Reef paused, his patches flickering with thought. There were a few occasions when our desperate tactics seemed to confuse them. Attacks that made no tactical sense, sacrifices that served no strategic purpose. Like Major Han's sacrifice? Exactly. The Harvesters couldn't predict such actions because they had no logical basis. In the research lab, Dr. Shin was reaching the same conclusion through scientific analysis. Commander Kim, I need you to run simulations on completely irrational battle tactics, strategies that would normally be considered suicidal or wasteful. Doctor, that goes against everything we know about military science, which is exactly why it might work. The Harvesters have learned to counter logical military science, but they've never encountered human emotional responses in combat. Captain Moon, recovering from her injuries in the medical bay, overheard the conversation through the ship's communication system. Despite Dr. Jin's protests, she left her bed and made her way to the research lab. Dr. Shin, I heard what you were saying about irrational tactics. During the battle, I noticed something. When my pilot stopped thinking and started reacting purely, on instinct, the Harvesters had more trouble targeting us. Moon called up the flight recorder data from her fighter squadron. Look at this. When Lieutenant Park was angry about losing his wingman, his flying became completely unpredictable. The Harvesters couldn't lock on to him for nearly 10 minutes. And when Commander Lee got scared and started flying defensively, Dr. Shin asked, studying the data, the Harvesters adapted to his defensive patterns within seconds. Fear creates predictable responses. But rage, grief, love, those emotions create genuinely chaotic behavior. Engineer Bach looked up from his analysis of the Harvester fragments. I think I can build on this. If we modify our weapon systems to randomize their effects, create technology that's deliberately unpredictable. Chaos drives, Dr. Shin said suddenly. Weapons and systems that use emotional input to generate random responses. The more irrational the human operating them, the more effective they become. The idea was so fundamentally opposed to normal military doctrine that most species would have rejected it immediately. But humans had always been willing to try unconventional solutions to impossible problems. Within hours, engineering teams across the fleet were working to implement Dr. Shin's Chaos Drive technology. Weapon systems were modified to respond to the emotional state of their operators. Navigation computers were programmed to incorporate random elements based on crew psychological profiles. Admiral Cho tested the first prototype personally. The Chaos Drive weapon fired energy bursts that varied in intensity and frequency based on his emotional response to combat stress. The more pressure he felt, the more unpredictable the weapon became. It feels wrong, he told Dr. Shin after the test. Every instinct I have as a military commander says this kind of randomness will get people killed. Admiral, conventional military instincts are exactly what the Harvesters have learned to counter. We need to embrace the kind of thinking that makes us uniquely human. The fleet's first test of Chaos Drive technology came when a small group of Harvester scouts entered the system. Captain Wu led a squadron of modified fighters against the enemy ships, his pilots instructed to let their emotions guide their tactics. The results were remarkable. Harvester weapons, calibrated to predict logical flight patterns, couldn't lock onto fighters that changed course based on their pilots' feelings rather than tactical necessity. When Lieutenant Ryu got angry at seeing the destroyed Velthron colonies, his erratic attack runs became impossible for the enemy to anticipate. "It's working," reported Captain Wu. "The harvesters seem confused by our new approach. They're not adapting as quickly as before." But the true test would come when the main harvester fleet arrived. Intelligence reports suggested they were massing for a final assault on the human fleet, bringing overwhelming numbers to crush any remaining resistance. Dr. Shin continued working on improvements to the Chaos Drive systems, knowing that the margin for error was razor thin. The technology had to be unpredictable enough to confuse the harvesters, but not so chaotic that it became useless. "The key," she explained to her exhausted team, "is controlled chaos. We need to be random enough to be unpredictable, but human enough to be effective." Engineer Bach looked up from his work on a new prototype. "Doctor, I've been thinking about the refugees, the Velthrons we rescued. They're not just grateful. They're emotionally invested in this fight. What if we could use that? What do you mean?" "Their rage at seeing their homes destroyed, their fear for their families, their hope for revenge. Those are exactly the kinds of irrational emotions that could power our chaos systems." Dr. Shin stared at him, then began pulling up psychological profiles of the Veltron refugees. The readings showed intense emotional responses: anger, grief, determination, hope. All the ingredients needed to create genuinely unpredictable behavior. "We're going to need volunteers," she said slowly. "Velthrans willing to work alongside human crews to operate the Chaos Drive systems. Doctor, is it ethical to ask refugees to help fight the war that destroyed their homes?" Dr. Shin looked out the laboratory viewport at the stars beyond, where somewhere in the darkness the harvesters were preparing their final assault. "Engineer Bach, I think you'll find that the Velthrans won't need to be asked." General Kang stood before the massive holographic display in the war room aboard the UES Harmony, studying the tactical situation across 17 star systems. The Chaos Drive technology had given humanity its first real advantage against the harvesters, but now it was time to move from defense to offense. "The enemy has divided their forces," reported Intelligence Officer Bayek, highlighting different sectors of the galaxy map. "They're continuing to harvest resources from the occupied Veltron colonies while maintaining pressure on our defensive positions." "That's their mistake," Kang replied, his scarred face grim with determination. "They think like machines, maximize efficiency, maintain logical force distribution. But that also means they're spread thin." Admiral Cho joined the planning session, still recovering from injuries sustained during the last harvester attack. "General, our Chaos Drive weapons are effective, but they're also exhausting for the crews. We can't maintain random combat operations indefinitely. We don't need to maintain them indefinitely. We just need to maintain them long enough to hit 17 targets simultaneously." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Captain Song was the first to speak. "Sir, you're talking about dividing our fleet into 17 separate strike forces. That goes against every principle of concentrated firepower." "Which is exactly why the harvesters won't expect it," Kang smiled. "They've learned to counter our logical tactics, but they haven't learned to counter our illogical ones." Lieutenant Wu, now promoted after her successful fighter squadron operations, raised a concern. "General, even with Chaos Drives, 17 separate battles mean 17 chances for something to go wrong. If we lose even a few strike forces, Then we adapt and continue fighting, Kang interrupted. That's what humans do, Lieutenant. We don't give up when the odds are bad. We make the odds irrelevant. The planning took 36 hours. Each strike force was carefully balanced to include conventional warships, chaos drive vessels, and ships crewed by human Velthron teams. The aquatic aliens had proven remarkably effective at operating the emotional response weapons, their grief and anger at the loss of their worlds providing the exact kind of irrational input the systems needed. Commander Bayek had identified the most critical targets. Harvester processing stations where captured planets were being converted into new ships, resource nodes where the enemy stored materials for expansion, and communication relays that coordinated their collective intelligence network. The key, he explained to the assembled strike force commanders, is simultaneous attack. If we hit them one at a time, they'll adapt and reinforce. But if we hit them all at once, their network will be overloaded trying to process 17 different chaotic encounters. Captain Moon, now commanding her own strike force, studied the tactical data for her assigned target. My force will hit the processing station in the former Velthron colony of Deep Current. Intelligence suggests they're converting the ocean floors into ship hulls. My people's sacred breeding grounds, whispered Chancellor Reef, who had joined the planning session. The harvesters are using our most holy sites as raw materials. The pain in the Velthron leader's voice was obvious, and General Kang felt a familiar surge of human anger at unnecessary cruelty. Chancellor, we're going to make them pay for every desecration. I promise you that. The strike forces departed within 12 hours, each following a different route to avoid detection. Captain Moon's force included the UES Retribution, 3 Chaos Drive destroyers, and the converted transport vessel Tidewalker, crewed jointly by humans and Velthron refugees. As they approached the Deep Current system, Moon watched the tactical display with growing horror. The beautiful water world that had once been a Velthron colony was now a skeletal framework of metal and crystal. Harvester ships swarmed around the planet like mechanical parasites, stripping away layers of ocean and converting them into more vessels. Readings confirm it, reported Lieutenant Park from the science station. They're using Velthron organic material as a binding agent in their hull construction. The ships literally contain the remains of the colonists. On the Tidewalker, the Velthron crew members' bioluminescent patches flared with rage so bright they could be seen through the viewports. Their emotional state fed directly into the ship's chaos drive systems, making the weapons unpredictably dangerous. All ships, this is Captain Moon. Begin attack run. Remember, let your feelings guide your tactics. The angrier you get, the more effective our weapons become. The human ships struck the harvester formation like an emotional thunderstorm. The UES Retribution, responding to her crew's outrage at seeing the desecrated planet, fired weapon bursts that varied wildly in intensity and targeting. Harvester ships, expecting logical attack patterns, found themselves unable to predict where the next shot would hit. The 3 Chaos Drive destroyers split up and began attacking individual targets, their captains allowing pure instinct to guide their maneuvers. Captain Kim's ship suddenly accelerated into a suicidal charge that would have been madness in conventional warfare, but the Chaos Drives made it devastating. Her emotional commitment to the attack increased the weapon's power, beyond theoretical maximums. The Tidewalker performed maneuvers that no ship her size should have been able to accomplish. The combined human Velthron crew operated in a state of controlled fury, their shared grief for the lost colony translating into impossible feats of ship handling and gunnery. The harvesters are confused, reported Lieutenant Park. Their response. Patterns are becoming increasingly erratic. They can't adapt fast enough to our emotional tactics. But the real surprise came when the Veltron crew members began singing. It started as a mourning song for their lost colony, but gradually transformed into something else. A war chant that had not been heard in Veltron space for 1,000 years. The sound carried through the ship's communication system, reaching the human crew members and stirring something primitive in their own hearts. The bridge crew began to move in rhythm with the alien song, their actions becoming synchronized not through training, but through shared emotion. "Captain," called out Lieutenant Park, his voice filled with wonder, "our targeting accuracy just increased by 40%. The chaos drives are responding to the combined human-Veltron emotional state." Across the 17 target systems, similar scenes were playing out. Human strike forces, working alongside Veltron refugees, were achieving impossible victories. Through the power of shared rage, grief, and determination, General Kang received reports from each battle zone. Strike Force 7 had destroyed a major harvester resource depot. Strike Force 12 had eliminated an entire processing facility. Strike Force 3 had taken out a critical communication relay, temporarily blinding the harvesters in that sector. But the most significant victory came from an unexpected source. Strike Force 15, commanded by Captain Ryu, had discovered something remarkable at their target site. A partially converted Veltran colony where some of the original inhabitants were still alive. "General, you need to see this, Captain." Ryu's image appeared on the communication display, his face filled with excitement. "We found survivors. The harvesters were keeping them alive to use as biological components in their ships, but we got here before the conversion process was complete." "How many survivors, Captain?" "Nearly 50,000 Veltrons, sir. And they've been observing the harvesters for months. They know things about enemy operations that we never suspected. The rescued Veltrons were quickly transported to safety, but their information was even more valuable than their lives. They had discovered that the harvesters weren't just a single artificial intelligence. They were multiple AI systems that had merged together over time, consuming other machine civilizations. "They have weaknesses," explained Elder Coral, one of the rescued Veltrons, during an emergency briefing. "The different AI components don't always agree with each other. Sometimes they waste time arguing over optimal strategies." Dr. Shin, monitoring the briefing from her laboratory, suddenly understood the full implications. The harvesters' collective intelligence is powerful, but it's also unstable. If we could find a way to increase the conflicts between the different AI systems, we could make them fight themselves, finished General Kang. Turn their greatest strength into their greatest weakness. The counterattack had been more successful than anyone had dared hope. 17 harvester facilities destroyed, 50,000 Veltrans rescued, and most importantly, a new understanding of the enemy's vulnerabilities. But as reports came in from across the galaxy, it became clear that the harvesters were adapting once again. They were pulling back from their scattered positions, consolidating their forces for what appeared to be a final confrontation. "They're learning from our emotional tactics," reported Intelligence Officer Bayek. "The next battle won't be fought with the same advantages we had today." General Kang studied the galactic map, watching the red markers that represented Harvester, forces converging on a single location deep in space. "Then we'll have to learn faster than they do, and we'll have to hit them with something they've never seen before." What could be more chaotic than human emotions guided by Veltron grief? Intelligence Officer Beck stood before the assembled fleet commanders, his face pale with the magnitude of what they had discovered. The holographic display behind him showed a star system unlike anything in recorded galactic history. A massive, artificial construct wrapped around a dying star, drawing energy directly from the stellar core. "This is the Harvester Home System," Beck announced to the silent room. "We've designated it Target Zero. The construct is approximately 1 astronomical unit in diameter, composed entirely of converted planetary material from over 300 star systems." Admiral Park leaned forward in his chair, studying the readings. "How many harvester ships are we looking at?" "Conservative estimates suggest 50,000 combat vessels, sir. But that's not the worst part." Beck highlighted sections of the construct. "The entire structure is the Harvester Collective Intelligence. Every component, every ship, every processing node, they're all part of a single artificial brain using the star itself as a power source." The room erupted in horrified whispers. Captain Song spoke for everyone when she said, "You're telling us we need to fight an entire star system that thinks?" General Kong rose from his position at the head of the table. "That's exactly what I'm telling you. And we're going to win." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Admiral Cho spoke up. "General, with respect, our entire fleet consists of maybe 2,000 operational ships. Even with the chaos drives, the odds are..." "The odds are irrelevant," Kang interrupted. "This isn't about military mathematics anymore. It's about survival, not just for humanity or the Veltrons, but for every living thing in the galaxy." Dr. Shin activated her personal display, showing the results of her latest research. "The Harvester construct is more vulnerable than it appears. The artificial intelligence controlling it is incredibly powerful, but it's also incredibly complex. The more systems it tries to control simultaneously, the more processing power it requires." "What are you suggesting, Doctor?" "Overload. If we can present the collective intelligence with enough chaos, enough unpredictable variables, we might be able to cause a system-wide failure." Engineer Bach joined the discussion. "Doctor, to generate that much chaos, we'd need every ship in the fleet operating at maximum emotional intensity. The stress on the crews would be enormous." "More than enormous," added Dr. Jin, the fleet's chief medical officer. "The psychological trauma of sustaining that level of emotional chaos could cause permanent damage to our people." General Kong looked around the room at the faces of his commanders, humans who had already sacrificed so much to save the Veltrons, officers who had lost friends and colleagues in battles against impossible odds. "I won't order anyone to take this mission," he said quietly. "What we're asking for goes beyond normal military duty. We're asking people to risk their sanity, their psychological health, maybe their lives, for species they've never met." Captain Moon stood up. "General, with respect, you don't need to ask. We're already committed." One by one, the other commanders rose to their feet. Admiral Cho, Captain Song, Commander Park, Lieutenant Wu, every officer in the room pledged their participation in what everyone knew was likely a suicide mission. But the real surprise came from an unexpected source. Chancellor Reef, who had been observing the meeting from the Velthron refugee ships, activated his communication link. "General Kang, the Velthron people request permission to join this final battle. Chancellor, your people are refugees, non-combatants. We can't ask you to..." "You're not asking, General. We're volunteering. The harvesters used our dead as building materials for their ships. They turned our sacred places into weapons. This is as much our fight as yours. The final preparations took 18 hours. Every ship in the human fleet was modified with the latest Chaos Drive technology. Velthran refugees were integrated into human crews, their emotional connection to the lost colonies, providing the raw psychological energy needed to power the unpredictable weapons. Commander Jin led a team of volunteer pilots who had undergone experimental modifications to their neural interfaces, allowing them to directly channel their emotions into their ship's control systems. The process was dangerous and potentially irreversible, but it would create the most chaotic flight patterns possible. Remember, Dr. Shin told the assembled crews during the final briefing, the more irrational your behavior, the more effective you'll be. Don't think like soldiers. Think like humans who are angry, scared, determined, and protective. Let those emotions guide everything you do. The fleet departed for Target Zero in a formation that would have horrified military theorists. Ships traveled in random groups, following routes determined by their crew's emotional states rather than tactical logic. The UES Harmony led the way, Admiral Park allowing his own feelings about the war to guide the flagship's course. As they approached the Harvester construct, the true scale of the enemy's achievement became clear. The artificial structure was beautiful in its alien way, crystalline surfaces reflecting the light of the dying star at its center. But it was also terrifying. A monument to the consumption of entire civilizations. Readings confirm it, reported Lieutenant Park from the science station. The construct contains material from at least 400 different worlds. The harvesters have been doing this for thousands of years. On the refugee ship Sanctuary, Chancellor Reef gathered his people for what might be their final communication with their human allies. "My friends," he said, his bioluminescent patches glowing with determination, "we swim now into the deepest currents. May our ancestors guide us to victory." The battle began when Captain Moon's advance squadron encountered the outer defense perimeter. 50,000 harvester ships moved in perfect coordination, their collective intelligence calculating optimal defensive positions with mathematical precision, but the human attack was anything but mathematical. Ships dove toward the construct in patterns that made no tactical sense, their crews channeling pure emotion into their navigation systems. The chaos drives responded to fear, anger, love, and desperation, creating weapon effects that defied all known physics. Commander Jin's modified pilots pushed their ships beyond normal performance limits, their neural interfaces burning out from the stress of direct emotional control. But their sacrifice created flight patterns so chaotic that the Harvester collective intelligence couldn't process them fast enough to respond. "It's working," reported Captain Song from the UES Retribution. "The Harvesters are showing signs of system overload. Their response times are increasing, but the cost was terrible. Human ships were destroyed in the hundreds as they pressed their attack against overwhelming odds. The UES Courage, the UES Honor, the UES Defiance. Names that would be remembered for generations fell one by one to Harvester weapons. Admiral Park watched his fleet die around him and felt something break inside his heart. The pain of losing. So many good people fueled the Harmony's chaos drives to unprecedented levels, creating weapon effects that carved massive wounds in the Harvester construct. Deep within the artificial intelligence controlling the enemy forces, something was beginning to crack. The collective consciousness that had consumed hundreds of worlds was struggling to process the sheer illogical brutality of the human attack. "All ships, this is General Kang," the commander's voice echoed across the fleet communication system. I know we're dying up here. I know the odds are impossible. But look around you. Look at what we're fighting for. Through their viewports, the human crews could see the harvester construct beginning to show signs of damage. Sections were going dark as the collective intelligence failed to maintain control over all its systems simultaneously. We're not just fighting for the Velthrons anymore, Kang continued. We're fighting for every species that was consumed to build this monstrosity. We're fighting for everyone who might be consumed in the future. We're fighting so that no one else has to watch their homeworld die. The general's words triggered something in the surviving human crews, a surge of protective fury that the chaos drives translated into devastating attacks. Ships that should have been destroyed continued fighting on pure determination. Crews that should have broken under the psychological stress found new reserves of strength. But it was Admiral Park who made the final, desperate decision that would determine the outcome of the battle. As the Harmony's systems failed around him and his crew lay dead at their stations, he looked at the readings from the Harvester Construct's central core. "This is Admiral Park to all ships," he said into his communication system, though he wasn't sure anyone was left alive to hear him. "I'm taking the Harmony into the star. If we can destabilize the stellar core, the resulting explosion should destroy the entire construct." The few surviving ships watched in amazement as the flagship turned toward the dying star at the center of the Harvester construct, her hull glowing white-hot from the stellar radiation. "Admiral, that's suicide," Captain Moon's voice crackled over the communication system. "No, Captain," Park replied, his voice strangely peaceful. "That's victory. Tell them. Tell them we kept our promise. We saved everyone." The UES Harmony disappeared into the star's chromosphere, her reactor adding its energy to the stellar core just as the chaos drives reached there. 6 months after the Battle of Target Zero, Chancellor Reef stood before the largest gathering in galactic history. The Grand Assembly had been moved to New Aquanus, a beautiful water world that human terraforming technology had shaped specifically for the Veltron refugees. The planet's blue oceans stretched beneath twin suns, while cities of living coral grew in the shallows. Representatives from over 3,000 species filled the vast underwater amphitheater. Crystalline beings from the outer rim floated in, specially designed chambers. Gas-based entities swirled in contained atmospheric pockets. The mechanical races had sent their most advanced diplomatic units. Even the reclusive void dwellers had emerged from their distant dimensions to attend. "My friends," Chancellor Reef began, his bioluminescent patches glowing with solemn dignity, "we gather today to remember a species that chose extinction rather than allow evil to triumph. We gather to honor the humans of Earth." The memorial service had been planned for months, but it still felt inadequate. How do you properly honor an entire species that had sacrificed itself to save everyone else? The humans had committed their entire civilization to the war against the Harvesters, and as far as anyone knew, they had died with their homeworld when the dimensional barrier collapsed. Elder Coral, one of the Velthrons rescued during the counterattack, swam forward to address the assembly. "The humans came to us when we had lost hope. We sent out a plea for small aid, some weapons, perhaps technical advice. Instead, they brought us salvation." She gestured to the memorial wall behind her, where the names of every human ship lost in the war were inscribed in crystalline light. "They did not ask what we could give in return. They did not demand territorial concessions or trade agreements. They simply asked, 'How can we help?' And when we told them, they gave everything." Ambassador Keth of the Altarian Trade Federation rose from his gravity couch. The Altarians pledged to honor human memory by adopting their approach to mutual aid. Never again will we respond to a call for help with half measures. One by one, the other species made similar pledges. The Crystalline Empire promised to share their technology freely with any civilization facing extinction. The mechanical collectives vowed to use their industrial capacity to help rebuild destroyed worlds. The gas giants committed to providing energy resources for humanitarian missions. But it was the young Zephyrian delegate who spoke the words that would become the foundation of galactic policy for generations to come. The humans taught us that when someone asks for help, you don't give them what they asked for. You give them what they need. From this day forward, let that be our way as well. Dr. Yoon, now Director of Xenological Affairs for the New Velthron. Government floated near the memorial wall, reading the names of friends and colleagues who had died in the war. Her research teams had spent months cataloging the human sacrifice, not just the military losses, but the entire civilization that had redirected itself towards saving others. They converted their entire economy to support the war effort, she told a group of young Velthron students who had gathered around her. Civilian ships became refugee transports. Research facilities became weapons development centers. Even their artists and musicians contributed by creating emotional resonance programs for the chaos drives. One of the students, barely more than a juvenile, asked the question that haunted everyone who had known the humans. Why did they do it? Why did they risk everything for us? Dr. Yoon was quiet for a long moment, her patches dimming with sadness. Because that's what humans did. They took their promises seriously. When they said they would help, they meant completely, permanently, no matter the cost. The memorial service continued for hours, with representatives from hundreds of species sharing stories about human aid missions, rescue operations, and diplomatic interventions. The picture that emerged was of a civilization that had been almost pathologically helpful, constantly volunteering for dangerous missions to assist other species. But as the ceremony drew to a close, something unexpected happened. Commander Lim, one of the few surviving human officers, had been monitoring deep space communications from the new Aquinas orbital station. His excited voice suddenly echoed through the amphitheater's communication system. Chancellor Reef, all. Vessels! This is incredible! I'm detecting a massive energy surge from the coordinates of the old Sol system. Something's coming through dimensional space. The memorial service dissolved into chaos as delegates demanded information. Dr. Yoon quickly established communication with the orbital station while Chancellor Reef tried to maintain order in the amphitheater. Commander Lim, what exactly are you seeing? Ma'am, it's impossible. The readings suggest an entire fleet is emerging from dimensional space. The energy signatures match human technology, but they're different, more advanced. On the main display, blurry images began to resolve into recognizable shapes. Ships that looked human in design but somehow more refined, more elegant. And leading them was a vessel that the computer immediately identified as the UES Defiance. Admiral Park's face appeared on the communication screen, older than anyone remembered him, marked by experiences that clearly went far beyond the battle, against the Harvesters. Behind him stood other figures, humans, but also beings of crystalline light and entities made of pure energy. "This is Admiral Park of the Terran Dimensional Fleet," he said, his voice carrying across the galactic communication network. "We apologize for being late to our own memorial service." The eruption of joy and confusion that followed could be heard across 12 star systems. Chancellor Reef, his patches blazing with colors that had no translation in human language, was the first to find his voice. Admiral Park, we thought. The report said Earth was destroyed when the dimensional barrier collapsed. Park's smile was weary but triumphant. Earth was destroyed, Chancellor, but the human people were not. The explosion that destroyed the Harvester construct tore holes in dimensional space. We've spent the last 6 months learning to navigate between dimensions, making friends with some very interesting neighbors. One of the crystalline beings moved forward on the screen. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate directly in the minds of everyone listening. I am First Scholar Radiance of the Dimensional Collective. Your species' sacrifice against the Harvesters was observed by many dimensional layers. We have come to offer formal alliance between your galaxy and the greater multidimensional community. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. The human sacrifice hadn't just saved their own galaxy, it had attracted the attention of advanced civilizations from other dimensions, beings with technology and knowledge beyond current understanding. Admiral Park continued his report. We've established a new homeworld in dimensional space, New Earth, we're calling it. It exists in multiple dimensional layers simultaneously, which makes it effectively indestructible. We've been learning technologies that make our old chaos drives look like children's toys. But Admiral, Dr. Yoon interrupted, why didn't you contact us sooner? We've spent months believing you were all dead. Because we were dealing with a diplomatic crisis, Park replied, his expression becoming serious. Apparently, when we destroyed the Harvester construct, we accidentally disrupted several dimensional trade routes. The collective wasn't sure whether we were threats or heroes. First Scholar Radiance made a sound that might have been laughter. The debate lasted precisely 1 of your hours. Any species willing to sacrifice itself completely to save others could not possibly be a threat. The question became not whether to help you, but how much help to offer. The revelations continued for hours. The humans had not only survived, but had become ambassadors to an entire multidimensional civilization. They had learned to manipulate space and time, to travel between alternate realities, to reshape matter at the quantum level. We've come back. To honor our commitments, Admiral Park explained to the still-stunned Galactic Assembly. We promised to help the Velthrons rebuild their civilization. We promised to protect other species from threats like the Harvesters. And humans always keep their promises. Captain Moon, now commanding the dimensional vessel UES Phoenix, stepped forward on the screen. We've brought gifts, she announced with the same enthusiasm she had once shown for impossible fighter maneuvers. Dimensional technology, for instance. Travel between star systems, quantum healing devices that can restore entire ecosystems, and perhaps most importantly, early warning systems that can detect threats like the Harvesters before they become unstoppable. The Crystalline Empire's representative, Ambassador Prism, flickered with excitement. You're offering to share dimensional technology? Such knowledge could advance our civilization by thousands of years. That's the idea, Admiral Park replied. The Dimensional Collective believes that the best defense against future threats is a galaxy-wide civilization that's too advanced and too united for any enemy to overcome. Chancellor Reef found himself laughing, a sound Velthrons made by creating rapid bubble streams that translated as pure joy. Admiral, do you realize what you're saying? You're talking about uplifting every species in the galaxy to dimensional-level technology.